all they contributed to our future was an unrepairable scar of loneliness, mistrust and hatred. Fears that have been with me all my life.
On leaving school, many Aborigines suffer from unemployment, depression, addiction. Welfare authorities will take many of their children away from them. 1926. Stoney Indians parade in the streets of Banff in the Rocky Mountains. Canada's indigenous peoples are also victims of discrimination. Stoney Indian Isaac Rolling in the Mud.
When we gave up the land, we gave up our rights. That is why we feel as if we're in confinement, with all the white people's laws and regulations. We were brought up free. Now we feel the imprisonment.
Canada has become independent from Britain. But, like Australia, it inherits the prejudices of empire. By the 1940s, large numbers of white Canadians are moving further north. The Canadian government encourages the nomadic Eskimos, the Inuit, to live in small, fixed settlements. In a report on settlement life, Henry Larson.
Conditions are appalling. Destitution, filth, and squalor are gradually undermining the health of these people, and if not checked, will result in their extermination.
Inuit Abe Ukpik.
There are only very few of us Eskimos, but millions of whites, just like mosquitoes. It is something very special and very wonderful to be an Eskimo. We are like snow geese. If an Eskimo forgets his Eskimo ways, he will be nothing but just another mosquito.
A white resident in Frobisher Bay.
This may be a doomed culture, but we're not replacing it with anything worthwhile. We've made every mistake in the British colonies, and then some.
Many native peoples throughout Canada struggle to survive. 1/3 are dependent on welfare. The infant mortality rate is double the national average. Life expectancy is one of the lowest in the world. Over the next 30 years, the indigenous peoples of the empire will struggle to overturn the legacy of racism. Chief Dan George of the Coast Salish people.
Do you know what it's like to have your race belittled? What it's like to be without pride in your race? It's like not caring about tomorrow. For what does tomorrow matter? It's like having a reserve that looks like a junkyard, because the beauty in the soul is dead. Come and integrate, you say. But how can I? What is there in my culture you value?
My great-grandfather helped carve a living out of the virgin forest. The silence of centuries was broken at last by the sounds of civilization, by the ring of axe and hammer, and the beat of steam engines.
220,000 white Rhodesians rule over 4 million Africans. White farmers control 70% of the best land, leaving most Africans with small, infertile holdings. In Gwelo, George Ndenze.
The way in which the blacks are being treated by the whites is the cause of all the unrest today. The Europeans have cheap native labor, which they exploit at the expense of African advancement. The white man has deprived us of all our rights in the land of our birth. Our state is pitiable.
Throughout the 1960s, a wave of nationalism sweeps across Africa. But fearful of South Africa's racist influence, Britain refuses to grant Southern Rhodesia her independence, until Ian Smith's white government yields to black majority rule. Smith's supporters are incensed.
I most certainly think the British government has let us down, and personally I think they stink.
I think it's a disgrace, and I'm terribly ashamed of the fact that I was even born in England.
They could have really built up the empire, instead of which they seem to have gone out of their way to destroy their empire.
The basic African definitely is not in a position to take over government.
The African, in no other sphere, have proved themselves capable of anything. Why is it that in Britain they seem to think the one thing the African is capable of doing is governing?
In a letter to the Rhodesian Herald, Harry Hart, July 1964.
I don't know what Mr. Smith is waiting for. England has continually shown itself to be treacherous to deal with. If Mr. Smith decides to take independence, then we are all behind him.
This is the Rhodesia Broadcasting Corporation. Here is the Prime Minister of Rhodesia.
November 1965. Ian Smith seizes power. A unilateral declaration of independence.
We are the first Western nation in the last 2 decades to have the determination to say so far and no further. God bless you all.
Rhodesia embarks on a path to South African-style apartheid. Britain has lost control to white nationalists in her last remaining African colony. Over the next 15 years, Rhodesia is engulfed by violent civil war. Ian Smith's Rhodesian army fights against 2 African guerrilla factions. 1972. Protesters riot against the government's racist policies. Leader of the communist-backed ZANU guerrillas, Robert Mugabe.
Our objective is the liquidation of imperialism and colonialism. Through armed struggle, we will set up a democratic state.
As the battle rages in the countryside, African civilians are caught in the middle. An African villager.
If we report the terrorists, they come and kill us. If we do not report them, the soldiers come to torture us.